If my sister-in-law says one more word about what my mother would have wanted, I will tell her exactly what my mother actually wanted, and it is written, notarized, and filed with the county probate court. I said it quietly. Not a threat. A statement of fact. Colleen set her wine glass down on my mother's dining room table, my mother's table, in my mother's house, the one we were all gathered in 6 weeks after the funeral, and she stared at me with the particular expression she always wore when she realized she had underestimated me. My brother Marcus reached over and touched her arm. Leah, he started. I looked at him. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, just long enough for him to remember who had sat beside him in that hospital room for 11 days straight, and who had flown in from a 4-day work trip to do it. Then I picked up my coat and left. That was the last civil conversation I had with either of them before everything unraveled. I want to tell you where I was when I found out because context matters in a story like this. I was at my desk on a Tuesday morning in March, running a routine compliance review for a regional bank client. That is what I do. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days looking for the thing that doesn't belong, the number that doesn't add up, the wire transfer that happened 3 minutes after business hours on a Friday in November. I find the lie inside the spreadsheet. It is not glamorous work. It smells like stale coffee and PDF files. But it made me very, very good at one specific thing: recognizing fraud before the person committing it realizes they've been seen. My mother's name was Patricia. She died of pancreatic cancer 14 months after diagnosis, which gave her just enough time to get her affairs in order, because that was exactly the kind of woman she was. She did not panic. She hired an estate attorney named David Rourke in the same week she started chemotherapy, and by the time she passed, every document was signed, witnessed, and registered. She left me $82,000 in a revocable living trust. The trust was designed to distribute to me in 2 equal installments, half when I turned 30, half when I turned 35, or in full at any time if I purchased a primary residence. Marcus was named co-trustee alongside her attorney. She trusted him because he was the older one, the stable one, the one who had already bought a house and settled down. She had no way of knowing what Colleen would do to him. The flag showed up in my email at 9:47 a.m. I had set up automatic credit monitoring after a colleague of mine had her identity stolen 3 years prior through a data breach at a dental office. It was a reflex, not paranoia. The alert read, Hard inquiry from Fidelity Home Lending, 9:02 a.m. I stared at the notification for a moment. The way you stare at something that doesn't make sense, the way your brain performs a small internal reboot before it accepts the information. I had not applied for a home loan. I was not in the market for a home loan. I was renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Charlotte and had no immediate plans to change that. A hard inquiry without my authorization meant exactly one thing. Someone had used my information to apply for credit in my name. I did not call my brother first. I called David Rourke. His assistant put me through in under 2 minutes. When I explained what I had received, there was a pause on his end that told me more than any sentence he could have offered. That pause had weight to it, the weight of a man who had been in estate law for 26 years and knew what a hard inquiry during active trust administration usually meant. He said he would pull the trust account records and call me back within the hour. He called back in 34 minutes. His voice was careful and precise, the way voices get when a professional is delivering bad news they are legally obligated to deliver accurately. The trust had received a modification request 2 weeks prior, he told me. A signed amendment, authorizing early full distribution due to a qualified residential purchase event. The signature on file was mine. I had not signed anything. I hung up. I sat very still for a moment. Outside my office window, Charlotte looked the same as it always did in March: gray sky, bare trees. Commuters moving along the sidewalk below without any awareness that a woman on the 14th floor had just discovered that her dead mother's money was being stolen by the people her dead mother had trusted most. I did not cry. I thought about my mother, the way she had organized her documents into color-coded folders in the last months of her life, the way she had made David Rourke walk her through every clause twice because she wanted to be sure I was protected. And then I thought about what Colleen had said to me at Thanksgiving 2 years before my mother died. She and Marcus had just bought their house, a 4-bedroom colonial in Raleigh that was roughly $30,000 above what their combined income could reasonably support, and Colleen had leaned over the pie dish and said, with the casual confidence of someone testing a theory, that it was really a shame the trust was tied up the way it was. That family money should move when family needs it. I had changed the subject. I should have recognized the blueprint then. Here's what I understood about Colleen that most people did not. She was not stupid. She was strategic in the way that people who have never faced real consequences are: strategic, bold, elaborately planned, and completely unaware that the architecture of their scheme had gaps you could drive a freight truck through. She had spent 2 years cultivating this. I could see it. Now, the way you see the pattern in a tiled floor once someone points it out: the dinner she had insisted on, the family meetings where she steered conversation toward money and need and fairness, the slow erosion of Marcus's independent judgment until he no longer made a single financial decision without running it by her first. She hadn't manipulated him into crime in one conversation. She had done it the way water reshapes stone, consistently, patiently over a long time. The memory came back sharp and specific. I was 24, sitting in Colleen and Marcus's kitchen while she unpacked groceries and talked about their mortgage payment. She had a way of making financial complaints sound like philosophical observations delivered lightly, with a small smile, as if she was just musing aloud. "Your mom has always been so generous with you," she had said, folding a paper bag. "I just think it's interesting how some kids get a safety net and some kids have to build everything themselves." I had said nothing because I had not known what to say. I know now. She was building a narrative. She was rehearsing the justification she would eventually give Marcus. That the trust was a family resource, that Leah had advantages they didn't, that redistributing it wasn't theft, it was equity. She believed she was correcting an imbalance. That was the thing that made my blood run cold. She wasn't operating from pure greed. She had constructed an entire moral framework that made what she was doing feel righteous. I closed my laptop. I called in to tell my team I would be working remotely for the rest of the day. Then I opened a new folder on my desktop and labeled it simply, Trust. The first thing I did was contact Fidelity Home Lending directly. I told them I was the named individual on the application, that I had not submitted or authorized any application bearing my name, and that I was formally requesting all documentation associated with the inquiry under the Fair Credit Reporting Act. They were legally required to comply. The package arrived in my email inbox within 4 business hours. I opened it with the same detached focus I bring to client audits. The application was thorough. My name, my social security number, my current employer, my income accurate, because Marcus had access to all of it as trustee. The purpose of the loan: down payment assistance for a property at 4412 Warwick Drive, Raleigh, North Carolina. Marcus and Colleen's address. They were refinancing their house. And they were using my trust distribution as the down payment source, which meant they needed the trust to appear to have distributed legitimately to me, and then for me to have gifted it forward. If this went through, I wouldn't just lose the money. My name would be on a gift letter attached to their mortgage. I would be financially and legally entangled in a document I had never agreed to sign, and any attempt to dispute it afterward would look like a family disagreement rather than a federal crime. I pulled up the amendment document Rourke had forwarded me. It was a DocuSign completion, which meant there was an audit trail. This is the thing that people who are not forensic accountants don't think about when they decide to forge an electronic signature. Every DocuSign document generates a certificate of completion that logs every interaction with that file. The IP address of each signer, the timestamp, the device type, the geographic location. It is a complete and legally admissible record of exactly where and when every signature was applied. I downloaded the certificate. The signature attributed to me had been applied on February 28th at 11:14 inches the morning. The IP address resolved to a residential network in Raleigh, North Carolina. On February 28th, I was in Boston. I had flown up for a 3-day client engagement that Wednesday and hadn't returned until Friday evening. My boarding passes, my hotel keycard records, my laptop login from the client's office network, all of it placed me unambiguously 400 miles away from wherever that document had been signed. I did not feel the hot spike of rage I expected. What I felt was colder and more focused than that. I felt the way I feel in the middle of a complex audit when the numbers finally resolve and the shape of the fraud becomes clear, that particular stillness that comes not from calm but from certainty. I knew exactly what had happened. I knew how it had happened. And I knew what I needed to do. I created a subfolder inside Trust and labeled it Evidence. I saved the DocuSign certificate. I saved the Fidelity inquiry documentation. I saved my boarding pass confirmation emails, my hotel reservation, and the client access logs that showed my laptop connecting to their secure network in Boston at 9:31 a.m. on February 28, 43 minutes before the signature on my trust amendment was applied in Raleigh. I saved every text message Marcus had sent me over the past 4 months, including the one where he mentioned, very casually, that he and Colleen were thinking about refinancing. He had framed it as small talk. He had been establishing the timeline. Then I waited. My phone rang that Saturday. Marcus. I let it ring once, twice, and then I answered. "Hey," he said, his voice carrying that particular brightness people use when they're nervous and trying not to sound it. "How are you doing?" "Just checking in." I said I was fine. He asked about work. I said work was good. There was a pause. And then, "Hey, so Colleen and I have some exciting news. We got approved for the refinance. The new rate is incredible. We're saving almost $400 a month." "That's great," I said. "Really great." He paused again. He was waiting for me to ask about the trust. I didn't. "So there's just one thing," he said. "With the gift letter. Since the distribution went through, the bank just needs you to come in and sign the final documentation confirming the funds. It's just a formality. They need the donor present at closing." Donor. He had called me the donor. I thought of my mother at her kitchen table, filling out color-coded folders. I thought of the way she had made David Rourke explain the co-trustee clause 3 separate times because she wanted Marcus to understand the responsibility he was accepting. I thought about the fact that Marcus had signed the amendment too, that his signature was on the same document, and that whatever Colleen had told him to justify it, whatever story she had built, he had chosen to believe it because it was easier than saying no to her. When is the closing? I asked. Next Friday at 2, he said. At the title company on Glenwood. You can make it, right? It would mean a lot to Colleen. You know how stressed she's been about the rate lock. I'll be there, I said. He exhaled with a relief so audible it almost sounded like gratitude. Leah, seriously, thank you. I know things have been weird between you guys, but this is going to be really good for us. Family should help family. I hung up. I sat in my apartment in the dark for a long time. The grief and the anger lived in the same place, which made them hard to separate. This was Marcus, my brother who had driven me to my SAT, who had called me every Sunday during my first year of college because I was homesick and too proud to admit it. Whatever Colleen had done to the person he used to be, this version of him had looked at our mother's money and decided his mortgage rate was more important. That calcified something in me. Not hatred. Something quieter. A closing. I called David Rourke on Monday morning. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for a long time after I finished, the kind of quiet that precedes careful and very specific language. He said he would need to involve the probate court given the fraudulent trust amendment. He said what I was describing constituted wire fraud, identity theft, and fraudulent misrepresentation to a federal lending institution. He said I had options. I told him I already knew my options. I told him what I needed from him specifically, and I told him I needed it by Thursday. He said, your mother chose well. I also called the FBI's financial crimes tip line, not dramatically, but because wire fraud involving a federally insured lending institution is a federal matter, and I knew enough about these cases to know that proper reporting channels matter when you want charges to stick. I filed a formal identity theft affidavit with the FTC. I overnighted copies of everything to David Rourke. And on Thursday afternoon I drove to the UPS store and made 4 certified copies of the complete evidence package, sealed in separate envelopes, labeled with the date and my signature across each seal. Friday arrived the way consequential days always do, unremarkably. I wore a blazer. I drove to the title company on Glenwood and found a parking space and sat in my car for 90 seconds, not praying exactly, but doing the thing that functions like prayer when you don't pray, which is being very still and very honest with yourself about what you are about to do and why. The conference room had a long table and a water dispenser in the corner that made a gurgling sound every few minutes. There was a closer named Rhonda who had the efficient, pleasant manner of someone who processes real estate transactions for a living and has heard most of the family dynamics a closing room can generate. Colleen was already there when I arrived. She was wearing a blazer I hadn't seen before, dove gray, clearly new, and she greeted me with a smile so large and deliberate it looked like something she had practiced. Leah. She stood up and reached forward, and I allowed her to hug me because I needed the next 40 minutes to go exactly as planned, and a rejected hug would have changed the temperature of the room. Marcus was beside her. He looked better than he had at Thanksgiving, rested, relieved even, the way people look when they believe the hard part is already over. He squeezed my shoulder. Thank you for coming, he said. I nodded. Rhonda arranged her documents and began with the standard overview. She was efficient and thorough, and I appreciated that about her. She went through the loan terms, the rate, the monthly payment schedule. Colleen kept her hands folded on the table and nodded at appropriate intervals, performing the role of composed adult homeowner with real dedication. And then Rhonda reached the page that mattered. This is the gift letter, she said, sliding a document toward me. It certifies that the $41,000 currently in escrow was received as a gift from you, Leah Calloway, to Marcus and Colleen Hargrove, that it is not a loan and carries no expectation of repayment, and that the funds originated from your personal assets. She looked at me. I just need you to confirm the information is accurate and sign at the bottom. The room had a particular stillness to it. Colleen was watching me with the composed expression of someone watching a door they believe is locked. Marcus was looking at the table. Rhonda held out a pen. I did not take it. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed the sealed envelope on the table. The sound it made against the laminate surface was quieter than I expected, but Rhonda straightened slightly and Colleen's composure shifted in a way that was almost imperceptible, a tightening around the eyes, a slight forward lean. The body's involuntary response to incoming information it doesn't yet have the vocabulary to process. I'm not able to sign that, I said clearly. I looked directly at Rhonda. I did not look at Colleen. The funds in escrow were not gifted by me. I did not authorize a trust distribution, and the signature on the trust amendment was forged using my identity without my knowledge or consent. Colleen started to speak. I continued. What I've placed on the table is a notarized affidavit of identity theft filed with the FTC this week, along with a formal fraud referral submitted to the FBI Financial Crimes Division. Beneath that is the DocuSign audit certificate for the trust amendment bearing my forged signature. Rhonda had stopped smiling. She had opened the envelope. The IP address on that certificate belongs to a residential network registered to Marcus and Colleen Hargrove. The timestamp shows the signature was applied at 11:14 a.m. on February 28th. I slid my hotel confirmation and boarding pass across the table. On February 28th, I was at a client site in Boston. My hotel keycard logs and corporate network access records confirm I was 400 miles away at the time of the signature. Marcus, I said. I looked at him now. I held his gaze the way I had held it at our mother's dining room table 6 weeks after the funeral, except this time I didn't walk away. You co-signed the amendment. Your signature is on the document too. He looked like he had been struck. Not surprised exactly, more like a man who had told himself a story so many times he had started to believe it was true, and was only now confronting the fact that believing a story doesn't change the evidence underneath it. Rhonda closed the envelope. Her voice was professional and completely flat. I need to pause this closing. She stood up. Under federal lending regulations, proceeding with this transaction knowing the stated gift funds may be the product of fraud would expose this company and this institution to significant liability. She looked at all three of us with the look of someone who had seen difficult things in closing rooms before, but perhaps not quite this specific configuration. I'm going to need to contact our compliance officer and our legal team before anything else happens here today. Colleen stood up. Her voice had gone high and tight, stripped of the performance she had been running since I walked in. She said I was making things up. She said I was jealous. She said our mother had always favored me and this was just another way of punishing Marcus for building a life. She said it quickly and all at once, the way people recite a story they have rehearsed, because the composure was gone and what was underneath it was panic. I looked at her. I thought about my mother making color-coded folders in a hospital bed. I thought about the ledger Colleen had been keeping in her head for years, the one where my mother's deliberate, considered decisions about her own money were filed under the category of things Colleen was owed. I thought about Marcus sitting in that room co-signing a document he knew was wrong because agreeing with Colleen had become, at some point, the path of least resistance. This is a matter for your attorneys, I said. Not me. Not this table. I picked up my bag. Colleen moved toward me, not violently at first, more like a reaching motion, an attempt to physically intercept the situation, and I stepped aside in a way that placed the corner of the table between us and put my back toward the security camera mounted above the door. This is not a conversation we're having, I told her. Whatever you need to say, you can say it to David Rourke or to a federal prosecutor. Rhonda had already picked up the phone. Colleen sank back into her chair. Marcus had not moved or spoken since I said his name. He was staring at the certified copies of his own signature on the trust amendment with an expression I recognized from the hospital room 11 days before our mother died. The expression of a man confronting something he had tried very hard not to know. I walked out through the lobby and into the parking lot. The March air was cold and the sky was still gray and my hands were completely steady. The next 2 months moved in the slow, bureaucratic way that legal consequences move. David Rourke filed an emergency motion with the probate court to freeze the trust pending investigation. The fraudulent amendment was voided. The mortgage closing was flagged by the lender's compliance team, and the loan application was referred to their fraud department, which in turn reported to the relevant federal authorities. Colleen was interviewed twice by an FBI financial crimes investigator. She retained a criminal defense attorney on the 3rd week. Marcus hired a separate one. The fact that they needed separate attorneys told you everything you needed to know about how those conversations were going. In April, Colleen was charged with wire fraud, identity theft, and making false statements to a federally insured lending institution. The charges carried mandatory federal sentencing guidelines. Marcus was not charged criminally, but he faced civil liability for breach of fiduciary duty as co-trustee, which meant his portion of the refinance equity and a significant portion of what remained in their joint savings was consumed by the restitution order and the judgment David Rourke secured on my behalf. The house on Warwick Drive went on the market in June. I got one email from Marcus. He sent it at 11 at night, 3 days after Colleen was indicted. It was 12 sentences long. About half of them were apologies and the other half were explanations, and the explanations were doing the work of minimizing what the apologies were theoretically acknowledging. He said he had convinced himself it was temporary. He said Colleen had told him you had verbally agreed. He said he thought the trust money would get paid back before I even noticed. He said he was sorry for what it had done to everything. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to David Rourke because any communication from a correspondent in a civil case goes to your attorney, and then I closed the email application and made dinner. Not out of cruelty, out of self-preservation. There is a version of this story where I write back, where I explain to Marcus in careful and empathetic terms that being manipulated by someone you love does not absolve you of the choices you made while under that influence. There is a version where I try to salvage something. I am not in that version right now. Maybe I will be someday. But my mother did not spend 11 days organizing her estate for me to spend my 20s managing my brother's emotional access to consequences he earned. That is not what she built the folder for. The trust distributed to me in full in August. $82,000, minus the legal fees, which David Rourke partially offset by recovering costs in the civil judgment. I put it in a high-yield account and did not touch it for 90 days. Not because I was being strategic. Because I needed some time to just let it exist as mine, undisturbed, the way my mother had intended. I am not angry anymore. I want to be clear about that, because people often want the ending of a story like this to burn, and I understand the appeal of that, but the truth is quieter. What I feel now is a particular kind of peace that is not the absence of hurt but the presence of boundaries. I know exactly where the line is. I know what it costs to cross it. And I know that my mother, who spent her last healthy months making sure her daughter would be taken care of, got exactly what she wanted in the end, not despite what happened, but through how I handled it. She taught me to read the spreadsheet. She just didn't know how relevant that lesson would become. If you have ever had to protect something a loved one left behind from someone who thought it was theirs to take, leave a heart in the comments. And if you want to know what happened at the sentencing hearing because the judge's remarks were something I will never forget, make sure you're subscribed. I'll be back with that next week.